everyone! Welcome back to Inspire Ed, where we learn, apply, and achieve success. And today we are going to be tackling AP Psychology, specifically Unit 1. So, Module 1 of the Myers textbook is all about the foundations of psychology, where we lay the groundwork for understanding this fascinating field. Let's take a closer look. So, in this section, we explore the definition of psychology, the different perspectives and approaches, and used to study human behavior and mental processes. So firstly, psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior. It seeks to answer questions like, why do we behave the way we do, and what processes occur in our minds that shape our thoughts, emotions, and action. So, as psychology is a science, it requires curiosity. So, when put to the test, its predictions need to be confirmed. The second criteria is that we need to allow for skepticism. That means that we don't doubt everything, but at the same time, we are not gullible to everything. And the third one is definitely humility. So we are willing to be surprised and follow new ideas, even though that's not our original prediction. So in terms of critical thinking, it examines assumptions, evaluates sources, discerns hidden biases, evaluates evidence, and assesses conclusions. One of the main reasons why critical thinking is crucial is because it clears the colored lenses of our biases. It leads us to surprising findings, and it also debunks popular assumptions. For example, many people might think that opposites attract, but in reality, opposites tend not to attract. And then, of course, critical thinking allows us to identify effective policies. For example, if we want to increase voting, we should emphasize that our peers are voting as well, instead of telling them about the low turnout problem. So, how does psychology develop from early understandings of mind and body to the beginnings of modern science? So, as we stated before, it all starts with curiosity. Early thinkers have always wondered about how our minds work, how our bodies relate to our mind, and how much of what we know comes built in, or as we say, innate. And of course, how much is acquired through experience, which explores the nature versus nurture issue. So way back then, it all started in ancient Greece, where philosopher teacher Socrates and Plato, his student, concluded that the mind is actually separate from the body and continues after the body dies, and that knowledge is actually innate. So they are representing the nature part of the nature versus nurture issue. And then after that, Plato's student Aristotle loved data, so he derived principles from careful observations and concluded that knowledge is in fact from experience and from memories. Flash forward to 1600s, modern science started flourishing, and so scientist and philosopher Descartes dissected animals and concluded that the fluid in the brain's cavities contained animal spirits, as he called, which flowed from the brain through nerves, provoking movement. And then in England, we have another philosopher called Francis Bacon, who is basically the founder of modern science. His influence lingers into psychological experiments even today. And 50 years later, John Locke, a British political philosopher, who completed a great paper arguing that the mind is actually a blank state, which experience writes on, forming modern empiricism, where essentially knowledge comes from experience and that observation and experimentation enable scientific knowledge. So when is psychological science actually born? And what are some of the important milestones? So the first psychology's first lab was created on December 8, 1879 in Germany's University of Leipzig, where Wilhelm Wundt, a professor, and two of his students created an experimental apparatus measuring how long it took for people to press a telegram key after hearing a ball hit a platform. And so they basically created the first lab experiment. And in terms of first schools of thought, we have structuralism, which is actually promoted by the said Wilhelm Wundt professor and one of his students, Edward Titchener. They discovered introspection, which is the process of looking inward to observe psychological processes. So, for example, we would train a person to report elements of their experiences as they, for example, looked at a rose. So they would say things like the scent of the rose, and they would describe their feelings while looking at the rose. This was all to reveal the structure of the human mind. However, introspection did fail, as it required smart verbal people with experience. And of course, not everyone is articulate enough to describe how they feel. And oftentimes, people don't know why they feel how they feel. Thus, structuralism as a whole started waning, and so is the method of introspection. This leads us to the second school of thought, functionalism, which is promoted by William James, a philosopher psychologist, and also influenced by Darwin. This explored how mental and behavioral processes function and how they enabled the organism to adapt, survive, and flourish. In terms of psychology's first woman, this was Mary Wilton Calkins, who was the first woman to be admitted into William James's graduate seminar at Harvard University. This was 30 years before American women could even vote, and she outscored all the male students on the exam. Although Harvard denied her PhD degree, she did not stop her psychological career. And later, she became the first female president of the American Psychological Association in 1905. And this also led to the second female APA president, Margaret Washburn, who also wrote the influential book, The Animal Mind, which basically synthesized animal behavior research in 1908. And lastly, this is when psychological science matures. So how did behaviorism, Freudian psychology, and humanistic psychology further develop psychological science? This leads us to behaviorism, which is the view that psychology should be an objective science and that it studies behavior without reference and without mental processes. This directly dismisses introspection, and this is what most psychologists today agree with. And so, one of our provocative American psychologists was John B. Watson, and later B.F. Skinner. And in terms of Freudian psychology, it emphasizes the ways our unconscious mind and childhood experiences affect our behavior. So, again, this includes Freud's teaching of his theory of personality and his views on unconscious sexual conflicts and the mind's defense against its own wishes and impulses. Lastly, we have humanistic psychology, which is a historically significant perspective, mainly emphasizing the human growth potential. This was led by Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. They both founded behaviorism and Freudian psychology, too limiting. So instead of focusing on conditioned responses or childhood memories, the humanistic psychologists focus on our potential for personal growth. And that wraps up our introduction to Module 1 of the Myers textbook for AP Psychology. We covered the sections on what is psychology, its history and approaches. And so, I hope this video has sparked your curiosity and motivated you to explore the fascinating world of psychology further. If you have any questions or need further clarification, feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll be happy to help. Stay curious, stay engaged, and I'll see you in the next video as we dive deeper into AP Psychology.